At Tapestry Church, we welcome you to experience God's love, presence, and blessing in a very real and clear and profound and undeniable way. And we invite you to worship with us on Sundays at 10:30 a.m. at 22 Crady Avenue in Millersville, and invite you to watch us as well on LCTV Channel 66 on Sundays at 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. All are welcome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Tapestry Church. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, some of you know I have one or two type A tendencies when it comes to driving, right? For instance, when I'm sitting in a turning lane waiting for a green light, I typically take it upon myself to consider the people behind me and so leave as little distance as safely possible between me and the car in front of me, so as many as my fellow motorists as possible can also get through the turn signal. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that always kind of gets to me, that I always kind of frown upon, even look down upon. When one of my fellow motorists doesn't follow my example, but rather leisurely leaves, 3 or 4 car lengths between them and the car turning in front of them, and then is slow to accelerate on green so that only 2 cars get through the green arrow rather than 6. I mean, I have to assume that they're not a team player or only out for themselves, or rather selfish, or maybe even lazy. I mean, it really is a fair amount of judgment on the personhood of someone based solely on how quickly they turn on green. But we do this, don't we? We tend to look down on others or consider, our understanding of the way the turning lane ought to work, as superior or better than someone else's understanding of the way things are or ought to work. There are even studies that have shown this tendency we have to exaggerate our own positive characteristics and abilities and kind of downplay those in others. In fact, studies have shown that most drivers think they do a better job than the average driver. Psychologists call this the state of illusory superiority. In other words, it's an illusion that we believe somehow that our way of thinking, doing, being is better than someone else's. For the next few moments, we're going to think together about what it might look like to let go of this, false sense of superiority. And I want to read from the Gospel writer John in chapter 4, beginning at verse 5, where Jesus is on his way through Samaria. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from the journey, was sitting by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, asks for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, and as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Let me give you a little bit of context here. Although it's often assumed, because of the reference in this passage to the woman's many husbands, that she's an immoral person. Truth is, she could just as easily have been the victim of a series of tragic circumstances. The text doesn't really tell us one way or the other. But here's something important to know. To receive a divorce in that day was a decision that was left completely to the man. In other words, a woman couldn't file for divorce, only a man. And guess what? The reason for the breakup almost always was placed on some so-called defect in the woman. And even more, it's important to understand that if a man did divorce a woman in that day, it was often a death sentence for the woman. That is, a divorced woman lost all status and value in the community, was seen literally as a reject, was a disgrace. Her own family wouldn't welcome her back. No one would employ a divorced woman. It's not like today where she could go back to teaching or something. And even other women would have been wary of a divorced woman and would have regarded her as a person of low moral values. And so often, the only way a divorced woman could escape starvation and homelessness was to either take on a new husband, or to prostitute herself, or to become another man's mistress. Now, did any of you notice that today's text, the reading was a little bit longer than usual? Does anybody know why? Well, because Jesus has a longer conversation with this woman than he does with anyone else in the New Testament record. And you know what else? This woman, according to John's account, is the first person that Jesus chooses to reveal himself to. And this very real, honest encounter is nothing short of life-changing for her. Let me ask you this. When Jesus stops to rest at that well and engages or let me put it like this. When Jesus stops there and engages this, what in his culture would have been deemed unclean, when he affirms this Samaritan woman's, her dignity, personhood, value in God's eyes, the cages of culture and religion fall away, and the world according to God bursts through. I mean, Jesus breaks no less than 3 Jewish customs in this encounter. First, he speaks to a woman. Second, she's a Samaritan, and a group that the Jewish community had real issues with and despised. And third, he asked her to get him a drink of water, which would have made him ceremonially unclean from using her cup or jar. Wrong gender, wrong ethnicity, wrong faith, and on and on. I mean, a Catholic theologian by the name of James Allison talks about how we think faith is about keeping parameters, about calling people out for not having it right, for not having the right spiritual practices, or for not having right doctrinal purity. But guess what? According to Jesus here, God has no fences or walls that say, as long as you follow these guidelines, stay within these painted lines, I'll love you and allow you to come near me. Break one of the guidelines, though, and I'll withdraw my love. In fact, if you were to look at the New Testament record, you'd never see Jesus placing limits on those who approached him. Prostitutes, thieves, tax collectors, lepers, the blind, the lame, all were welcome. The only ones Jesus sent packing were the religious leaders who were trying to put up police tape around Jesus so that only, those they thought were worthy could get close. And so no lepers, no prostitutes, no poor, none who were too fat or had withered limbs or bleeding disorders were to get too close to Jesus. You have to draw the line somewhere, right? And yet Jesus erased the line over and over again. I mean, everyone knew this woman was an easy date, the kind of woman you didn't take home to meet mom and dad. If anything, Jesus should have observed proper protocol and sent another woman, like Mary or Martha, to speak to her. But Jesus didn't follow community standards in many of his dealings with others. A hated Roman soldier comes to him requesting help for an ailing servant. Show him the road, the crowd is thinking. This is the enemy. If ever, a boundary is to be put up, it's certainly with the godless Romans. Jesus heals the servant with just a word. A woman caught in the act of adultery is dragged before him. Now he has to follow the law. There's no way out of this one. Only Jesus doesn't condemn her. A thief caught dead to rights, sentenced to die, and hangs on a cross next to Jesus. Remember me when you come into your kingdom, he gasps. Here finally, says the crowd, certainly Jesus will have the sense to use his last breath to tell this criminal where to get off. But Jesus invites the man to spend eternity in paradise with him. See, as in our day, where there are those for whom the good news is that they're insiders and outsiders and we get to be on the inside, so it was in Jesus' day too. But maybe the good news is actually that there are no longer any outsiders. I mean, it's kind of interesting. The Bible begins with the creation of a world and a garden, and one tree in the garden is strangely named the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Not the tree of sin, not the tree of self-destruction. The biblical writers give a lengthier, more descriptive picture of why the tree is poisonous. Apparently, by eating from this forbidden tree, one is given the power to assess, to look at others and to look at oneself and measure according to a standard, the knowledge of good and evil. That's the fruit of this ancient tree. It empowers human beings to see what is praiseworthy and what is despicable in one another. It provides satanic power, really, in that those who receive it can now accuse, right? Anyone remember Jesus' favorite titles for the devil? Both the word devil and Satan mean accuser or slanderer. The accuser, said Jesus, is the one who has come to steal, kill, and destroy. And how does the accuser steal, kill, and destroy? Apparently, it's through accusations, through picking out faults and flaws and weaknesses. I mean, did anybody see this in the news the other week? Let's say this gets filed under the most American headline of recent. Court says, guy who burned his face praying over sizzling fajitas at Applebee's can't sue. Anybody see that? The judge said the danger was self-evident. Well, apparently, the danger is self-evident in this judging others. God says, don't eat from this tree. That is, don't try to judge as only I can judge. For on the day that you do, you will surely die. And so now in our day, it's like, many in the church think that if we don't expose others' sins, we're failing our calling. But that deadly assumption insists that the world is transformed not through the power of love, sacrifice, and prayer, but through the power of critique, through the methods of the accuser, rather than the methods of the cross. So, maybe, did any of you take notice? This was not too long ago that President Obama, he made some ill-timed remarks on the Crusades. Some folks, they jumped on him for what they took as a defense of Islam, a berating of Christians. The defense mechanisms went up before the kernel of truth behind the president's comments was planted. That is, it seems that the president was only borrowing from the 20th century American theologian, very influential theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr. He's the guy who wrote what has become known as the Serenity Prayer. Well, Niebuhr had this basic idea that evil isn't just out there. It's in me too. The line of good and evil runs through all of us. So, part of what it means to give up this sense of superiority is to realize that we're all in the same boat. That we're not divided up into healthy people and unhealthy people. When it comes to brokenness and habits and hurts, hang-ups, additions, problems, sin, nobody here is in the not me category. Not me. Everybody here is in the me too category, right? Some of us would say, I'm filled with pride. I can be arrogant, self-centered, demand my own way, self-willed, get stubborn sometimes. In fact, if that's you, turn to the person next to you and just say, me too. With some conviction now, some honesty. Some of you would say, I have anger issues. You may not believe it to look at me, but I can be resentful, bitter, say hurtful things, be passive-aggressive, can be a grudge-holding, judgment-passing, cranky, grumpy person. If that's you, turn to the person next to you and say, me too. Just get it off your chest. It's like I say, I have issues. I'm a mess. I need God. And all of you say, all the people say, me too. There's no not me category. Did any of you see this wasn't too long ago, the VA secretary, Robert McDonald, was serving food to a homeless guy in Los Angeles. And in conversation with the guy, he said he served with special forces. The cameras were rolling, caught the exchange. The news media did some digging and found out that McDonald never actually served in that capacity. It's kind of weird that story came out soon after the NBC anchor Brian Williams story, where Williams reportedly fabricated the accounts of his peril while covering the news in Iraq. It's also kind of weird that people, got so very upset with Williams and McDonald's as if we don't do that very thing. Whether we're exaggerating events to make ourselves sound better or editing details to make us look better, we do the same thing. I do the same thing. It's not right. And of course, people need to be held accountable, but it's a part of our lives as fallen creatures. We're haunted by our inadequacies and our quest for something more. Can you kind of get how stuff like with McDonald and Williams happens and where it comes from and understand why? Can you see some of it in your own life? Maybe if you're like me, you can. Part of what it means to give up superiority is to recognize that when it comes to sin, there is no not me category. Rather, we're all in the me too category. And see, here's why we're free to give up this false sense of superiority. This Christianity thing is not about moving from vice to virtue, as we tend to think it is. If anything, we move from virtue to Christ, meaning that Christ and not we ourselves is the source of our righteousness. The righteousness we have is not our own, but that of a merciful, gracious God. And when our righteousness is not our own, there's no extra credit to be obtained. There's no basis on which to compare ourselves to each other, because what qualifies us to receive this grace is not our virtue, but our need, and we're all equal in our need. In the church, we sometimes talk about the law and the gospel. Well, here's what is meant by the law. It's almost always an if-then proposition. If you follow all the rules in the Bible, God will then love you and you will be happy. If you lose 20 pounds, then you will be worthy of love. If you have never have a racist, sexist, or homophobic thought, then you will be worthy of calling other people out on their racism, sexism, and homophobia. But as one writer puts it, the gospel is not an if-then proposition. It's more Wizard of Oz than that. The gospel is because, right? Because of the wonderful things he does. Because God is our creator, and because we rebel against the idea of being created beings and insist on trying to be God for ourselves, and because God will not play by our rules, and because in the fullness of time, when God had had quite enough of all of that, God became a human in Jesus Christ to show us who God really is. And because when God came to God's own and we received him not, and because God would not be deterred and went so far as to hang from a cross that we built and didn't lift a finger to condemn, but said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." And because Jesus Christ defeated even death in the grave and rose on the third day, and because we've all sinned and fall short and are forever turned in on ourselves and forget that we belong to God, and that none of our successes guarantee this and none of our failures exclude this, and because God loves God's creation and refuses for our sin and brokenness and inability to do the right thing to be the last word, because God came to save and not judge, well, therefore, we're saved by grace as a gift and not by the works of the law. And see, that truth will set us free like no self-help plan can ever do. I mean, does anybody else tend to find that a little bit offensive? The fact that God loves me as I am right now and not as I could be if only I got everything together. I mean, that seems foolish. You know, there's nothing greater I can do to make God love me more. That seems foolish to me. My ego holds out for a me-based solution, but the solution isn't me-shaped. It's cross-shaped or cruciform. See, when Jesus first speaks to the Samaritan woman, she assumes that he doesn't know who she is. But Jesus knows quite well who she is and loves her just the same. By this point, she's probably been pretty beaten down by life. I mean, maybe you can imagine from your own experience just how tired and worn thin and maybe even depressed she was by the sheer weight of all that she's had to overcome and perhaps all that she's worked so hard to try to conceal. How she must have thirsted to be loved, accepted, and affirmed. And Jesus engages her when nobody else wanted to be anywhere near. And he not only makes time to listen, he respects her fundamental worth and dignity as a beloved child of God, treats her as someone whose story is worth being told. In other words, Jesus has seen her. She exists to him, has worth, value, significance. And all of this is treatment to which she is unaccustomed. And so when this woman says, "I see you're a prophet," she's making a confession of faith. And why? Because Jesus has seen her and her plight, has recognized her, spoken with her, and offered her something of incomparable worth. And so when he speaks of her past, both knowingly and compassionately, she realizes she's in the presence of a prophet. I mean, think about it like this. There are two kinds of "I'm sorry." There's the apology of responsibility and blame, you know, the 4-year-old saying to his brother, "I'm sorry I hit you." And the other kind of sorry says, "I see you, and I see your pain." I mean, this is the sorry we utter at a funeral or when we hear someone is struggling. And this is what we long for in life. And this is what you and I and this woman at the well, Samaritan woman at the well, get from Jesus. "I see you, and I see your pain." I came across a story not long ago about high school basketball, and maybe there aren't too many high school basketball fans here or watching, but if you happen to be a fan of the Gainesville Tornadoes in Gainesville, Texas, you would be alone. Usually our fan base was close to zero, said one Gainesville player. My parents came to one game, but they didn't come to the other ones because they didn't have time, said another. The other students at Gainesville, a juvenile correction facility for felon offenders, don't come to the games either because, well, mostly because they can't get out. One of the few perks at the facility for very good behavior is a chance to leave the prison a few times a year to play basketball. And Gainesville players play against private schools like Vanguard College Prep in Waco, Texas. And it was before that recent matchup that two Vanguard players, Hudson Bradley and Ben Martinson, announced that they weren't going to play against a team with no fans. And so before their home game against Gainesville, Bradley and Martinson asked some of their Vanguard favor to cheer for Gainesville instead. Gainesville players had no idea what was happening. They walked onto the court to find their own signs of support, their own cheerleaders, even their own fan section. Half the crowd was assigned to cheer for Gainesville, but as the game went on, everybody started to cheer for Gainesville. I mean, every time they scored, the gym was just lit up with cheering and clapping. Everyone was on their feet, said Bradley. We all need someone to believe in us. We all need someone who knows our mistakes and loves us anyway, said Bradley. And for that, the Gainesville players can't thank those boys enough. When I'm an old man, I'll still be thinking about this, said one Gainesville player. But we have someone who knows our mistakes and loves us anyway. And that is enough to give up any false sense of superiority. Thank you for joining us at Tapestry Church this morning. We hope you enjoyed the message. For more information, you may check out our website or Facebook page, and you may see us live weekly at 22 Crady Avenue at 10:30. All are welcome.